The more I rewatch Gravity Falls, the more I respect what I think is one of the most thoughtful and nuanced treatments of childhood love. Its passion, its dizzying wonder, its ultimate disappointment that I have seen in a lot of animated shows. It's mature without being completely divorced from the general sensibility of this adventurous, fun-loving show. It is crisp and precise without being preachy or over the top. It understands, oh, it so deeply understands the passions of Dipper, how subtly embarrassing this is, and how he kind of knows it, how he really does not stand a chance with Wendy because she's so much older, and yet he holds out this desperate, idealistic hope. And ultimately, it sees Dipper working through the process of dealing with the disintegration of these childhood idealizations. It deals with him understanding that he is not going to be with Wendy, and that is okay. It is not wrong that he wanted that for himself. It is typical to being a child, and even with all Dipper's intellectual wizardry, and even with the grandiose, magniloquent way in which he thinks of himself as being far more grown up and far more mature than he actually is, even with all that, he is still subject to these childhood passions, childhood whimsies, and yearnings that look rather small and silly in hindsight, and the show gets that, but are not small and silly as they are experienced, which the show also understands. It's a good choice, but what makes it work so well in the context of the show is how it relates to Dipper's general flaws in his worldview. What does Dipper want more than anything else? Think about that. What he wants, I would say, is to be respected. To be thought of as this mature, adult, scientist, adventurer who goes into unknown territories and discovers the truth and is widely praised for it. To be blunt about it, he wants to be, forward. And the show does not either completely validate these ambitions or dismiss them. Dipper is genuinely intelligent, and he is genuinely committed. Perhaps one day he will be this adventurer. But he is constantly wrong in overestimating his wisdom, which he thinks is so pure and so rational and so scientific. And yet, his experiences constantly force him to confront the fact that he does not know quite as much as he thinks he does. He becomes humbler over the course of the show. Alex Hirsch has described the show as being about two twins, one that really wants to grow up and one that is more than happy to just live in the moment and enjoy being 12 to going on 13. And how, Hirsch says, in reality, Mabel, despite being overtly more childish, is wiser in that she is free from all of these grandiose, a bit absurd desires to grow up as fast as possible. Dipper, having those desires, is far more childish than he would like to admit. Now, that's not to say Mabel is perfect, and if the show is a little too sentimental in terms of Mabel, it nonetheless still investigates her own neuroses and her own problems that stem from her desire to have perfect stasis, for nothing to ever fundamentally change. This is ultimately the fantasy that Mabel gets and must reject to demonstrate her character growth. to demonstrate that she has moved beyond these illusions of this platonic, unchanging, bright, sunshiny, lovely world, and must descend into the chaos, into the unpredictability of being in the world and confront the challenges of growing up. Dipper must confront these challenges too, but in a different way. He must confront the fact that the image he has of himself is fundamentally flawed. It's not a bad image, but he's not there yet. His perspective is narrower than he thinks it is, and he needs more learning, more experience to truly become the person he has always tried to be. Wendy is kind of this emblematization of that. Dipper wants to be older. Dipper wants to be cool. Dipper wants to be this person who always has all the answers, or at least a good enough answer, without being flustered. Wendy is all of those things. That is not the only reason Dipper wants to be with her, but it is a major reason, and it is why Dipper having this crush is important beyond merely the level of, oh, hey, it is good dramatic storytelling to have this idealistic little scientist who thinks he's so smart and so mature come into this situation in terms of this crush that he can't handle and not really know what to do. Wendy treats him quite well. She lets him down, but she lets him down with a level of empathy and a level of understanding that is quite remarkable for a teenager without feeling too sentimental and too maudlin. She is a symbol for Dipper, not in a bad way. Not in the way that he treats her like she is not a person. There is no malice in his mind, but he fundamentally projects all of his adolescent, tween, early teenage fantasies about what he wants for himself and what he believes this romance should be like onto Wendy. And she knows to a certain extent. She understands Dipper's affection for her, and she understands that he is the kind of person who would like to think that he's subtle, but he's not. He is extremely obvious and overt in his constant worrying about whether Wendy will like him, in his constant obsession to try to spend as much time with Wendy as he can. He is constrained within the perspective of his young, if quite smart, mind. He is a bit solipsistic. He does not quite see how others view him. He does not have the maturity to understand that perspective. And yet, that is okay. It is alright that he, at this stage of his life, does not quite understand how he comes off to others, or how he is projecting all of these fantasies and ideals onto Wendy. Wendy, at the end of episode 202, is able to communicate to Dipper that yes, she knows that he's had this crush on her, and that it's okay, that she's not mad or anything, but that, yes, he's too young, which intellectually he knows. It's a letdown for Dipper, but it is a letdown that is also an opportunity. It allows him to stop merely wishing. The philosopher Martin Heidegger is ardently against this devotion to mere wishing. Heidegger is all about the actual experience in the world. Not merely in a physical, utilitarian sense, but in the way of how we actually encounter the world around us, how we experience anxiety or isolation or the idea of death. And ultimately, wishing is this abstract projection of what we want to be true into the world of what is true. It fundamentally takes us away from the immediate, visceral details of our experience and keeps us isolated and constrained by this narrow, sentimental, detached idealism. It puts a distance between us and our actual experience, which Heidegger is diametrically opposed to. So much of his philosophy is about the need to confront the actual experience, the actual components and order and disorder sometimes of being in the world, instead of projecting all of these assumptions and all these idealizations and all these narrow utilitarian viewpoints onto how we actually experience the world. He is against idle talk, famously, for the same reason. That idle talk, which is basically gossip for him. It's these superficial conversations about a topic that do not actually attempt to look sincerely and coherently at the topic as a whole. And in fact, they steer away from that topic. They steer away into mere convention, into these distracting conversations that have a sort of numbing effect, a sort of insulation that prevents the confrontation, direct and immediate, with the real subject being discussed. Dipper is able to get away from this kind of wishing, this kind of emphatic and lost projection of what he wants to be the case into the world, to prevent himself from having to deal with the harsh consequences of what is. But these consequences can be dealt with. And in fact, for the show, a major and important part of coming of age, or even starting to come of age, of entering adolescence, is being able to confront the breakdown of these systems, the breakdown of these idealizations. There is a loss to that, a loss of unity, a loss of coherence, but there's also a gain. All these new opportunities that present themselves when you are no longer so devoted to hiding behind these fundamental falsities, these fundamental, if understandable, misapprehensions of the actual relations around you. Dipper is never going to be with Wendy. To a certain level, in his mind, he knows that, and yet the passions of love cause him to become distracted from that truth and pursue a goal that is never going to be. Dipper, to his credit, is able to prove consistently from this point onward that he has grown up, that he has matured, that he is not the person that he once was, so devoted, so rather absurdly, to the idea of being in a relationship with Wendy. A devotion that is rather hypocritical considering how silly he thinks that Mabel's crushes are. And yes, Mabel's crushes are silly, but she kind of knows that they're silly. She accepts that. Dipper thinks that he is so different. He holds on to that misconception that his love for Wendy, his relentless pining, is somehow of a fundamentally different order from what happens to Mabel, and that he can criticize her while holding on to this obsession. And that's not true. He understands that's not true later. He gains a broader perspective. A great example is in the Blendon's Game episode, when, in a rather amusing scene, he goes back 10 years in time and he sees little kid Wendy having a crush on him. It's a bit, perhaps, over-obvious, but it works. It works largely because of the moment of revelation it provokes in Dipper. Mabel makes a little joke about how he now knows what she feels, and he laughs for a bit, and then he goes, oh. And you can see that process of steady understanding dawning on him. He is able to realize that while his childish love was understandable, it is childish, and he needs to move beyond it. He is able to reject the temptation to be with Wendy in the Mabel's Bubble episode. He is able to say, no, I'm not going to be fooled by this illusion. I know the world as it is. And that's not always a beautiful experience, but it is a cathartic experience that opens up all kinds of new possibilities, as the show understands. So thank you all for watching. If you liked yourself today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate my Patreon if you can, and you want to see more videos like this. Keep watching Gravity Falls. Rewatching that show is never a waste of time. Truly a beautiful work. Anyway, tune in soon for our next analysis. It will be coming soon. Promise you that. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.